All right, the microphone is picking me up. So I mentioned previously, I think it was when we were talking yesterday, when we were talking about perichoresis, I mentioned that a long time ago I taught conflict on my campus for the first time, and students said, this is the most important class I've ever taken. And I have taken very seriously since then teaching conflict. And in explaining to you the chief big idea behind how Americans handle conflict and how Japanese people handle conflict, well, the first thing I should say, you've heard me say that I'm teaching at Tsuda University. And at Tsuda, I just finished teaching a 9-week class about conflict management. And my colleagues at Tsuda, when they found out that was the topic of the class, their reaction was, well, we don't deal with it, we avoid it. How are you ever going to teach a class in it? And so I talked about a lot of what I'm about to talk about, especially including assertiveness. Now, I meant to mention assertiveness this morning when I talked about self-disclosure. Because self-disclosure is part of what you have to do if you're going to approach conflict assertively. And in the kind of second half of my talk here, I'm going to walk you through the basics of assertiveness, specifically for people from collective cultures. I bring up assertiveness because when I was applying for the Fulbright grant, I went through the Japanese Ministry of Education, their plans for what their priorities were. What's the most important thing that college students in Japan need to learn? And they were very clear. They said, Japanese students, especially while studying English, they need to learn how to be assertive. Because Japanese students do a great job learning English and really know English, and then they go to do business with people from India and Australia and from other English-speaking nations, and all these other people from other countries, they find it easy to be assertive. They've done it all their lives. And Japanese students who are even fluent in English still have a hard time being assertive. So, I made the pitch to the Japanese Ministry of Education that studying things like conflict are the opportunity to learn about assertiveness. I say all that now to say assertiveness is that high of a priority for the Japanese government that they've said in higher education, it's at the top. So now, the big idea when it comes to conflict starts with these two people, Robert Blake and Jane Mouton. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of where their idea came from. Dr. Blake, on the left, was a management professor. Dr. Mouton, on the right, was still a graduate student, his best student. And an oil company called them up, Exxon. And that oil company had just started putting offshore oil platforms right off the coast of Texas. And they said to Dr. Blake, some of our offshore oil platforms are producing a lot of oil, and some are producing only a little bit. And we think it might be a management problem. Would you go and see what you can observe? And so he and Dr. Mouton, she wasn't a doctor yet, but they took a helicopter out to the offshore oil platform, and they walked around for a few days watching and taking notes. They came back and made their presentation. They said, some of your managers are very, very strict, and they supervise their workers carefully, and they make everybody work as hard as they possibly can. It was very Japanese. And Drs. Blake and Mouton called them produce or perish. Now that line right there, the y-axis, that's for productivity, how much oil they put out. So produce or perish was at the top. Now there's a problem with this. When you have a manager that works people that hard, people get tired, people get injured, people get unhappy, they don't like their job, and productivity starts to fall, and you aren't pumping out as much oil. So some managers figured that out, and they started to be very nice to their workers. And Blake and Mouton said, this axis, the x-axis, is how well you take care of your people. So the y-axis is how much you focus on productivity. Get as much oil as you can. The x-axis is how much effort do you put into taking care of your people. Making sure they take rest breaks, making sure that they are following safety rules, talking to them when they're unhappy. And Blake and Mouton said the managers who are really good at taking care of the people, they called them country club. Because a country club in the United States is someplace you go to play sports, to have dinners and dances. And managers who were like that made the workplace very, very enjoyable. They also said you have some managers who are not good at productivity and they're not good at taking care of their people, and they called them impoverished. They're just bad. Their workers don't work hard, but their workers are also not taken care of. So 0 on both productivity and on care for the people. Now the difficulty is, according to Blake and Mouton, if you maximize productivity, your workers are not happy and healthy. If you take perfect care of your workers, they may not get much work done. So they said most of your workers are right there, and they called them middle of the road. Or most of your managers are middle of the road. They do an okay job on producing oil. They produce maybe half as much as they could. And they do an okay job on taking care of their people. They do maybe half as well as they could, because they're trying to balance both of those, and it's difficult. But they said it is possible to have managers who are up here. Human resources. They said the way you do it, it's very similar to being the coach of a sports team. You first of all find out what is each worker good at, and you put them to work doing what they are really, really good at. You then try to help them feel excited about what they do. Try to help them get really emotionally attached to the work that they do. And when they're very motivated, and when they are doing what they're good at, they will be happy, and they will be very, very productive. And that phrase, human resources, Blake and Mouton invented that phrase. You may have heard American companies almost always have a human resources department, and it's who hires and fires and takes care of other problems. That's all based on this theory. And you might be thinking, hold it, I thought this was about conflict. Why aren't we talking about conflict? We are. Because a few years later, a couple of researchers named Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilman, they looked at that exact chart that you just drew. They said, this is also how we deal with conflict. Let me show you. You go into a conflict, it's you and the other person in the conflict. So you remember the y-axis was getting as much oil as possible out of the ground? They looked at that y-axis and they said, that's fighting. Because you go into a conflict and you fight, that's about getting what you want. So the y-axis was, whatever it is in the conflict, you know what outcome you want. Maybe you have a conflict with your roommate. You have a very hard test to study for, and they're playing their music really loudly while you're trying to study. If you're fighting, you may go yell at them. You may go break whatever they're playing the music on because you want quiet. But then down here, yielding. Yielding is what you do to make them happy. The y-axis is getting what you want. The x-axis, you remember before, the x-axis was taking care of the workers. Now the x-axis is taking care of the relationship. I'm going to let them play their music loud, even though I have to study, because I want to keep the peace with them. I'm just going to give in. Okay, now somebody look back at the human resources chart. What did we call the manager who was bad at everything? Impoverished. And for Thomas and Kilmann, avoiding conflict means not getting what you want and also not taking care of the relationship. Now I will point out, I showed you Thomas and Kilmann. They're both white Americans. They're very weird. And so they're saying that avoidance is bad. It's a bad conflict strategy. We will soon get to research that takes into account more perspectives and says avoidance can actually be wise. But at this point in the development of the idea, avoidance is bad. We also, you might recall from the previous chart, had the middle of the road. Now, the middle of the road in conflict, compromise. Compromise means you give up some of what you want, they give up some of what they want. So you might go talk your roommate into at least turning their music down to where they're still playing it but not loud. What they want is to play the music loud. That's fun. What you want is quiet so you can study. If there's still music playing, it's not really quiet, and they're not playing it loud, which is what they want, but you both gave something up. So that's what this conflict style is, compromising. But in theory, you remember the human resources was up on the right. In theory, you should be able to collaborate. Collaborate. And a human resources manager could get the best out of the workers, and the workers would also enjoy it. Collaborating as a style of managing conflict, we often call the win-win. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there were two roommates, and in their house there was only one orange. And both of them wanted the orange. Now, if they fight over the orange, one of them punches the other, takes the orange. They win the conflict. If they yield, one of them says, "Oh, did you want this orange?" And the other one says, No, it's okay, you take it, even though they really want it. If they're avoiding conflict, maybe they just don't keep food in the house at all. They always eat out because they know if there's food in the house, they'll fight over it. So it's just easier not to have food in the house, even though it's a big hassle to have to go out anytime you want food. If they compromise, they get a big knife and they slice the orange in half and they each get half of it, even though they both wanted a whole orange. So what do we mean by collaborate? Here's what we mean. What if one of them said to the other, "What are you going to do with the orange?" And the other one said, "I'm going to make orange juice." And the first one said, "I am actually going to bake a cake, and the recipe says to take orange peel and grate it into the cake batter. Could I have the peel?" And the first roommate would say, "Absolutely. Have the whole peel. I'll take the whole pulp. I'll get all the orange juice I want. You can have the entire peel, which I didn't need. And that is an example of a win-win. The terms we use for how to arrive at that, separating, and I should have put this on the slides. Where's that marker? There it is. Separating positions from interests. Positions from interests. Positions, what that means is, when you and another person are caught in a conflict, what you want or what you demand is your position. What they demand is their position. And usually, both your positions cannot happen at the same time. So your roommate wants to play their music loud. They have a stressful life, and blasting music is how they cope. You want it completely quiet. You have an important test and you need to study. Loud music, completely quiet, can't both happen. Those are your positions. Interests are, why do you want what you want? Why do you want it? Remember our example. Why do you want the orange? What are you going to do with it? The position originally was, I want an orange. Well, I also want an orange. Well, we only have a single orange. You can't both have it. There's only one of them. But then they talk to each other. What are you going to do with the orange? Well, I'm going to make juice. Well, I need the peel to make a cake. Well, we can do that. What if the roommates talk to each other? I need to blast music to manage my stress. I need a quiet place to study. Well, hey, you know what? You could go over to my sister's house down the street. She's out of town. It's quiet there. You could study there. Well, you know what? You could go with my best friend who's going to an amusement park, and you could go ride roller coasters and scream. Now that I know why you need what you're demanding, I can help you. We can think together about ways for you to get what you want. That is what we're talking about when we talk about collaborating. And sometimes I don't know why I have things on the slides. This is an old set of slides. This is a visual for compromising. I don't know why it's there, but that's cutting an orange in half. Back we are to collaborating. All right. There's one more little detail I've got to give you before we start talking about conflict behavior as it is distinct between the United States and Japan. There was a different set of researchers, Linda Putnam and Cherie Wilson, who said, actually, there are not 5 conflict styles, there are just 3. They organized it differently. They said, first of all, there's fighting. And we've already said one way to respond to conflict is fighting. They said there is solving problems. And from the styles we talked about before, compromising and collaborating would both be examples of solving problems. And I'm only telling you this because it's about to factor into the differences between the United States and Japan. So, fighting, solving problems. Third, they said, there is what they called smoothing over, calming people down. Now, before we had 5 styles. We had fighting, we had compromising, we had collaborating. What 2 have I not mentioned? Avoidance and what? Avoidance and yielding. Those are the 2 that are smoothing. You calm people down either by giving in, or you calm people down by just staying out of the conflict in the first place. All right. So fighting, solving problems, smoothing over. Now I can introduce you to Stella Ting Toomey. I put her name on the board before. This is her face, Stella Ting Toomey. Her specialty, her biggest contribution to the communication field is a theory entitled Face Negotiation Theory. Face Negotiation Theory. I have no idea why I did not put this on the slide while I was making slides about face negotiation theory, but I did not. Here's what she said. A lot of it is ground we've already covered. She said, first of all, conflict is different. Conflict behavior is different when you look at people from individualist versus collectivist cultures. But people approach conflict not based on what culture they're from. Instead, their conflict behavior is predicted by their self-construal. It's predicted by, are they independent or interdependent, just like we talked about on Monday. She said, people with an independent self-construal tend to be concerned with self-face. Self-face, which is to say, people with an independent self-construal want to make themselves look good to other people. If you remember our conversation right before lunch about how men tend to engage in report talk, do a lot of build themselves up, tell stories where they're the hero, all of that is self-face behavior. And people with an independent self-construal, including women, are more likely to pitch to boost themselves. People with an interdependent self-construal are more likely to have other face as their concern, other face goals. And what she meant by that, they monitor the people around them. They observe the people around them, and they will avoid bringing up topics that might be embarrassing, that might be upsetting. They will say things and do things for the purpose of helping other people have positive face. So their concern is not their own face primarily. But then she said there's a third set of face goals, and that's mutual face, mutual face. Sometimes in a conflict situation, she said people realize it's not that I will look bad, it's not that the other will look upset. It's that we both, and in our relationship, we will be threatened. So in that circumstance, the goal is not self-face or other face, it's mutual face. And with that in mind, we are back to our old friends, the X and Y axis. And the Y axis, it used to be about get a lot of oil out of the ground, and then the X-axis used to be take care of your workers. And then it was get what you want in the conflict, take care of the relationship. What do you think it's going to be this time? What do you think the Y-axis will be? Self-face goals. And what do you think the X-axis will be? Other face. And now, you remember we made it all the way out to human resources and collaborating. What do you think that'll be? Mutual face. I practically don't have to teach this. You're giving me the answers. I love it. So what she said was, self-face goals tend to predict the following conflict behaviors. People with a self-face goal are more likely to be defensive. So, for example, with our orange example, if you've got the orange in your hand and your roommate wants it, and you feel defensive, you might say, well, I don't know why you have to pick on me for just wanting an orange. I mean, I don't think that's selfish. A good sign of defensiveness is when you feel tempted to say to someone, look, nobody's attacking you. We just have one orange and we both want it. We could work together and figure out how to divide it up. But she said people with self-face goals often feel attacked. They will therefore defend, whether they need to or not. People with self-face goals are more likely to resort to emotional expression, get angry, perhaps cry, sometimes ridicule or make fun of. That also can be emotional expression. And then our old friend, fighting. And fighting doesn't have to mean, taking your fist and punching. You can fight by yelling. You can fight you don't even have to yell if you say things that are mean and hostile. If in conflict, people primarily have other face goals. I'm concerned about the other person and how they feel. These are the characteristic conflict behaviors. There's yielding, which we've talked about before. Let them have it. There is avoiding, which we've talked about before. Just don't keep food in the house at all, and the issue never comes up. And then there's also bringing in outsiders. Now I want to stop and mention something because I almost forgot. You remember we had 5 conflict styles, and then I stopped and said, but Putnam and Wilson said there are only 3. Fighting, solving problems, smoothing. You remember that? Okay. Here we have fighting. There we have smoothing. Yielding, avoiding, and bringing in outsiders to decide it. These are all smoothing. These are all trying to calm it down. And one of my favorite details out of Ting Toomey's research to isolate one of the differences between collective cultures and individualist cultures. Ting Toomey found that in Asia, if they bring in an outsider to try to decide the conflict, they want to make sure both people know the outsider. So 2 cousins might bring in the grandparent. 2 students might bring in the teacher. But in individualist cultures, in the United States, if they bring in an outsider, it has to be someone that neither one of them knows. So 2 people go to court, and they want a judge. And the judge cannot know either of the people, and definitely can't know both of them, or they would be not allowed to judge the case. All right. So with self-face goals, fighting is more likely. With other face goals, smoothing is more likely. Let's see if you can pull it off one more time. What's left? Second? Mutual face, solving problems. The 2 of you did it. You're very good collaborators. So let's have a look. Where mutual face is the goal, here are the behaviors that are predicted, all of them under the category of solving problems. Apologizing, talking in private, very often when conflict goes wrong, it goes wrong with other people watching. And so if the two people involved in the conflict agree to go someplace private and talk, it improves the chance that it will be settled, that there will be a good solution. A third behavior, making the decision to remain calm, which is kind of the opposite of emotional expression. When Stella Ting Toomey says solutions, what she means is collaborating, separating positions from interests, and trying to figure out a win-win solution. You take the pulp of the orange and I'll take the peel. You go study at my sister's house. I'm going to go ride roller coasters with your friend. We both get what we want. Those are solutions. And then finally, in the middle of conflict, expressing respect. Stopping and changing the subject and saying, I hope you know how much I value you, I look up to you. Right now we're fighting, but this relationship is important to me. Those behaviors are predicted by mutual face concern. All right. So the final thing that I wanted to say that comes chiefly out of communication research is to define assertiveness and then walk you through the principles of assertiveness as they apply to people from collective cultures with interdependent self-construal. If I were to explain the principle of assertiveness the simplest way possible, there are three, we've mentioned fighting and we've mentioned avoidance and yielding. Fighting describes a situation where you have a lot of respect for yourself and not enough respect for the other. So I'm going to get what I want. It may hurt you, but that's too bad. Yielding and maybe avoidance describe a situation where you have lots of respect for them and not enough respect for yourself. So with that as the clue, how do you think I'm going to define assertiveness? You're on a hot streak, so I thought I'd see if I could get another one. Fighting is respect for yourself but not for them. Yielding is you respect them but not yourself. What do you think assertiveness is?
Respecting both.
Yes. You respect yourself enough to speak up and to tell them what the problem is and to be direct and not to drop hints and not to avoid. But you respect them enough. You do it gently. You do it positively. You're very careful to choose your language so that it doesn't attack them. That's I think the best definition of assertiveness. Respect yourself and at the same time respect them. And I am, this is what I'm doing visually. This is what I did for the Tsuda students. I split the screen in half. And the left side of the screen with the eye-blinding yellow, these are the principles of assertiveness that people in individualist cultures have to learn. So I went through those pretty quickly because the Tsuda students and Japanese people in general tend to be good at them. But then over here on the right side, I went a little more slowly through principles of assertiveness for people with an interdependent self-construal from a collectivist culture. So if you're independent and from an individualist culture, don't do the following things. Don't confront people. Don't go to them and say, you need to turn this music down. Don't overpower them. Don't yell at them. Don't insult them. Don't attack them. And I didn't slow down and spend a lot of time on this because I was teaching Japanese people don't confront and don't overpower. And that came very naturally. I also said, don't describe the other person. Well, you're just lazy. Well, you're just a jerk. Describing other people, summing up what kind of person they are, is a way of attacking. And then when you teach this to individualists with an independent self-construal, you have to teach them, do the following things. Be respectful. If you're going to be assertive, be cheerful. So I might go to the roommate and say, hey, that music you're playing, I know you love it. I love it too. And sometime when I don't have a test to study for, I want to get together with you and we should listen to this music together. Now, you've just said the same thing, that you need to study for your test, but you told them cheerfully. You didn't attack them. And you can even be affectionate. You can tell them, I care a lot about you. You're very important to me. Right now, we've got to figure out what to do about the music. It's great music. Let's listen to it some other time. Let's celebrate with this awesome music after I get a good grade on my test. That's being assertive. You're speaking up for your need, but you're doing it in a way that's positive to them. That's how you teach it to people from the United States. Here's how you teach it to people in Japan. First of all, don't apologize. And that's hard. At Tsuda, we did a whole day of role-playing, and I had to stop them repeatedly because they wanted to apologize. But if you want to be assertive and interact with people who've been assertive all their life, if they're playing their loud music when you need to study, you don't apologize. You come right out and say, this is what I need, and you be direct with it. You don't allow them to interrupt you. Sometimes you have to be assertive with people who are resisting, and they'll try to interrupt you. And being assertive, you don't have to get angry, you don't have to yell. You just say, I'm not finished. Or you maybe say, excuse me, I have something I need to say. And you don't let them interrupt you. As for what you do, you should, just the word do came up. You should speak about yourself. I have a hard time concentrating on studying when there's music playing. And things we've said about self-disclosure, this is hard. You also name your feelings. I feel right now a little anxious about my test tomorrow. And then you make requests. Please turn the music down. We can enjoy it tomorrow when my test is done. I'll come party with you, just not tonight. And then the one last detail I put in here, because these are my notes from when I taught it at Tsuda, I said these are the ones you got to focus on. All right. Given how we are doing on time, I am going to jump off of this, and I'm going to get to two things that I think are Christian influences at the heart of the difference. One of them is about assertiveness. Jesus, in teaching the crowds who came out to hear him preach, spoke directly about how to handle conflict. There are a lot of things today that Christians like to talk about that Jesus never mentioned. He did mention conflict, and I'm going to jump right to it. Just 3 verses.
き入れないなら、教会に伝えなさい。教会の言うことさえも聞き入れないなら、彼を違法人、酒税人のように扱いなさい。
So if you were to ask Christians who've studied the Bible, what does the Bible say about conflict? That's the first place they'll send you, not the last. But what it teaches is you shouldn't avoid it. You should go, be direct, be assertive, tell the other person about the problem. The other major teaching, probably the bigger of the two that comes out of the Bible, is that all of us, every member of the human race, since there have been humans, has a conflict with God. Because God's standard is perfection, and we've broken God's law. But God forgave us. Jesus gave us his death as a free gift, and God offered us forgiveness. And Jesus taught a parable. And it gets right at how we are to handle conflict by forgiving. And it's in the same chapter. It starts just 4 verses later. So this is one of the slightly longer passages we've listened to. It's 14 verses. But this is the story Jesus told to get the idea across.
兄弟が私に対して罪を犯した場合、何回許すべきでしょうか。7回まででしょうか。イエスは言われた。
私は7回までとは言いません。7回を70倍するまでです。ですから、天の御国は王である一人の人に例えることができます。その人は自分の家来たちと生産をしたいと思った。生産が始まると、まず1万タラントの負債のある者が王のところに連れてこられた。彼は返済することができなかったので、その主君は彼に自分自身を妻子、持っているものをすべて売って返済するように命じた。それで家来はひれ伏して主君を拝し、もう少し待ってください。そうすればすべてお返しします。と言った。家来の主君はかわいそうに思って彼を許し、負債を免除してやった。ところが、その家来が出ていくと、自分に100デナリの借りがある仲間の一人に出会った。彼はその人を捕まえて首を絞め、借金を返せと言った。彼の仲間はひれ伏して、もう少し待ってください。そうすればお返しします。と嘆願した。しかし彼は承知せず、その人を引いていって負債を返すまで牢に放り込んだ。彼の仲間たちは事の成り行きを見て非常に心を痛め、言って一部始終を主君に話した。そこで主君は彼を呼びつけていった。悪い家来、お前が私に懇願したから、私はお前の負債をすべて免除してやった。私がお前を憐れんでやったように、